If you're like most people, you've probably at one point had the experience of your alarm clock becoming a part of your dream before waking up. Or perhaps had some other sound like the TV you left on before falling asleep influence your dreams. But what would happen if reality influenced your dreams during a nightmare? Well, it would probably only add to the horror. While all of the stories on this list are creepy, some are more unexplainable than others. Here are 5 first-hand stories of people whose nightmares had strangely read into reality. Number 5. This story was submitted to me by Earl Feinhardt. It was a long and stressful day, so falling asleep was easy. I think a dream started to fade in around halfway through the night. It wasn't a pleasant dream. I'll try to describe it the best I could. I was in the woods outside of a giant castle. Everything was black except for the night sky, which had a hint of blue. I remember this horrifying sound coming from inside the castle, as if something were calling me. It's downright disturbing to think about it even now. The sound was some kind of demonic, hellish voice, and it echoed through the woods. I somehow knew it was coming from inside the castle, and yet it sounded as if the source of the sound was a few hundred feet away from me. This was not a lucid dream. I had no conscious control over myself, so I made my way to the castle. There were no doors. It was as if the inside of this castle was also the outside. I don't know how else to describe it. The sound of the demonic voice was no doubt getting louder, and as I walked the open corridors of the castle, the halls started to become more narrow, and I felt myself banging into the walls as I dragged myself along. The sounds of the screaming were coming from beyond a door on my left. I entered, and I swear to God, there was nothing but blackness in the room. And yet, I still felt myself moving closer to the sound. I banged into something, and that's when I woke up, hunched over my 4-year-old son's bed, who was crying and horrified. He had been screaming because he also had a nightmare, and I scared him even more, as he described the way I walked in and then stopped in front of his bed, slowly lowering myself closer to him. Number 4. This story was posted by a forum user named Joey Mancuso. I just want to point out before sharing my story that I am an atheist and do not believe in any kinds of miracles, gods, or anything of that sort. However, I still don't know how to explain this. I was having a really disturbing dream. It seemed to be Halloween night, and I was with my friends trick-or-treating. We hit 2 houses. The first one was normal from what I remember. When we rang the doorbell to a second house, the door opened on its own into a darkish blue living room. I stepped inside, and my friends were gone at this point. I looked around the room I was in. The door I had just entered from no longer existed. In fact, the whole room seemed to have rapidly changed appearance, a common occurrence in dreams. After exploring the house, I came to a room upstairs, even though I didn't remember climbing the stairs. On the wall I was facing was a giant framed picture, at least 10 meters long and 20 meters wide. The picture was of my 30-year-old cousin, who I hadn't seen in years. Her eyes were enlarged to an uncomfortable amount, and they followed me everywhere I went. The giant portrait suddenly cracked, and the rusty, scratchy, ear-piercing sound of the giant nails holding the portrait on the wall painfully filled my eardrums. The portrait started to fall off the wall, and I watched, completely frozen, as it fell on top of me. But before it could crush me, I was awake. It was maybe 5 in the morning. Minutes after waking up, my cell phone rang. I picked up. It was my uncle, calling to tell me that my cousin had just overdosed on heroin and died. Number 3. I was having a nightmare that started off with me in my house reading a newspaper. Then the lights went out, and the dream started to focus on my trying to find out why the power was cut. The fuse box was apparently in the basement in this dream, which is, by the way, inaccurate to real life. I went down to the basement with a flashlight and opened up the fuse box. There was a sticky note inside saying, "Go back upstairs to the red room." While still in the basement, I started to hear a moaning type sound coming from the boiler room/laundry room. My brain knew my childhood fears, and it seemed to be taking advantage of them in this nightmare. The door to the boiler room cracked open, and something poked its head out to look at me. I left the basement after seeing this, following the sticky notes orders. I went upstairs to the second floor of the house, and there was a glowing red door at the end of the hall, a door that doesn't actually exist in my real house. Now, there was a disturbing echoing sound coming from beyond the door, and as I got closer, it became more clear that it was a voice, chanting the number 314, 314. I opened the door, and there was just a chair in the room, facing the wall across from me. The room was as red as the glow that had been illuminating through the door. The voice chanting 314 was clearer now. It was an extremely creepy voice, almost feeling like it was speaking into my ear. I woke up abruptly, with my heart beating somewhat quickly. I grabbed my iPhone that was sitting on the desk next to me to check the time. It was 3:14 a.m. You may think I just saw a clock while half awake or something, but I have no digital clocks in my room. The only clock would be the one on my iPhone that was in the same position as I had left it before going to bed. To this day, I have no idea how my dream knew it was 3:14, or if there was supposed to be some kind of meaning behind it. Number 2. This one was from an Ask Reddit post. It was a night during the summer 2015. I was high out of my mind after a party. I was fortunate enough to not get caught by my parents as I walked to my room to get straight to bed. I was at the part of my high where I was just exhausted and wanted to get some sleep, and so I fell asleep in probably 10 minutes or less. Have you ever heard about that idea that smoking pot and then going to sleep high alters your dreams or gives you some kind of enhanced dreaming capabilities? Well, after this one, I won't be fighting that theory. I don't remember anything before this dream. It started out with me in the woods in the middle of the night. In real life, you would just be surrounded by trees and the sounds of night critters, nothing special. But being that this was a dream, it was much worse. There were ghostly wind sounds coming from everywhere. Instead of bug noises, there were wolf howls and sounds of footsteps coming from behind me. There was that magically horrifying feeling of a dream that you just can't describe, but it made it so much more than just being trapped in the woods. I found myself running away from the footsteps that were consistently the same distance behind me until reaching a building in the middle of the woods. Of course, I went inside and boarded the door shut with planks that seemed to have come out of nowhere. This dream seemed to have gone on forever, too long to describe it all, but to summarize, I was in that building, which turned out to be a house, and the footsteps that were following me from outside were circling the house. I tried to find a weapon, but the house was almost completely empty. Everything was black and white at this point. While sitting on a couch in the living room, one of the only pieces of furniture there was a shadow that appeared at the window, and shortly after, the figure standing outside knocked on the window. It kept knocking and knocking until I woke up, but the knocking didn't stop. I jumped out of bed when I realized someone was at my window, looking in and knocking. I squealed for my dad, and the figure at the window ran off. I'm still open to the possibility that my high hadn't completely worn off, and that it might have been a partial wake-up hallucination, but it was also so real that, at the same time, I have to believe it actually happened. The sound was real, and the figure at my window was real. My dad and I looked around the property to find no one. He told me I just had a bad dream and to go back to sleep. I hope he was right. Number 1. I was having a horrifying dream, possibly the most disturbing nightmare of my life. I was in my house, or the closest thing to my house that my dream could produce. Ironically enough, I was in bed in this dream, or at least I can only start remembering past the point of my lying in bed, and all of a sudden, the sound came from downstairs. I walked downstairs in the dark, not turning on any lights, to where I thought the sound was coming from. I was on my middle floor now. The dream was telling me to go downstairs to my laundry room, and so I did. But as I got there, expecting the noise to be louder and closer, it sounded like it was just as far as before. Now I was going upstairs to the kitchen, and it's strange, outside of every window was complete blackness, not general nighttime darkness. There was nothingness. I think all that existed in this dream was my house. Now my dream started to suggest that the banging sounds were coming from upstairs, so I went back upstairs and was eventually led to the attic door. It was surely beyond that door. I opened it. There was an old woman standing by a bunch of boxes. She was slowly but loudly slamming her hand on one of the boxes, producing an unnatural sound. I tried to quietly step back away from the attic, but the old woman turned around, opened her mouth twice as wide as anyone humanly could, reached out her arms, began to scream, and leaped toward me. That's when I woke up. I thought it was just a horrific dream, but when I heard a bang coming from downstairs, a bang similar to what I heard in my dream, I felt my heart completely drop. On my way downstairs, there was another bang. It was the front door. I got the butcher knife from my knife holder in the kitchen and crouched behind the door. I was waiting for the next time he would pound on the door and I would warn him to go away. I waited for a good minute in silence and finally decided to take a quick look through the window. There was somebody standing in my driveway. I couldn't tell if he was facing me or looking at me or not, but he was surely the one who was pounding on my door at 4 a.m. He walked away down the sidewalk moments after he must have noticed me. The pounding on my door was the kind of pounding you would expect from someone trying to break in a door, not to get a house owner's attention. I thought it was just crazy and horrifying that the pounding and banging from this potential robber or killer didn't wake me up, rather became the key point to a horrifying dream.